We are Life Church Livonia.
Things happening at Life Church Livonia, I could just stand up here and talk about them all day, right? And that's not a bad thing. Thursday, we had an incredible prayer night that I know some of you had an opportunity to go. It was so good that the common refrain when we ended the night was, we should do this again. We should do this again. And so for those who are out there saying yes, it's either because you missed it or because you were there and you were like, yes. So if you missed it, you were like, yes, yes. And if you were there, you were like, yes. It was so incredible. God showed up. We worshiped for and prayed for 2.5 hours. And it was a really beautiful, sweet time for us as a church. And so I just want to really encourage you that God is at work in our midst. And I believe that incredible things are on the horizon for you and for us as a church. And so today we have an incredible opportunity to start a brand new series. And I want to start with a question today. And it seems on the surface like a pretty easy question. And it's this: what do you do when you reach the end of something? If it's a book, you have to decide, am I ever going to read a book again? Some of you haven't read a book since high school. I get it, right? There you go. And others are like, when you get to the end of the book, you're like, I need a new book by tomorrow or else I might die. If it's the end of your dinner, you have a decision to make. Will I have seconds or maybe thirds? And the answer for me is usually yes, absolutely. When you reach the end of a road, you have a decision to make. Am I going to turn around and head back the way I came and find a new route, or am I going to make my own road? Which is usually what I would have done in college. And I got myself in trouble a lot of times for doing that. And so when we reach the end of something, we have a decision to make. But what if the end isn't external to your life, but essential to your life? What if the end that you're facing isn't as simple as whether or not to have seconds at dinner or to find a new book or to take a new route as you're driving? What if the end that you're reaching feels absolutely essential to your life because it has to do with your physical well-being, your emotional well-being, your spiritual well-being, the health of your relationships? What do we do when we reach the end? And a phrase that we'll commonly hear from people that are in that spot is they'll say things like, I'm at the very end of my rope, right? I'm at the very end of my rope. Or if they're under 30, they might say, I can't even. I literally can't. And for some of us, this phrase has become so popular, so especially the I can't even, is that I don't think people really even realize what it means to be at the end of their rope. Or maybe our ropes have just gotten shorter in America. That we reach the end of it much more quickly than ever before. Because when we're at the true end of our rope, emotionally, physically, relationally, spiritually, there's a sense there, a struggle there, that if you let go, you will die. That everything will come crashing down. I was a rock climber back in my 20s and 30s, and whenever we would climb to the top of some mountain, and oftentimes you would rappel down off the backside. You would go down a different way than you came up. And always, 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 one of the maxims of climbing was make sure that you don't run out of rope. And it sounds silly, but when you're rappelling down, you have to make sure your rope reaches the bottom of the cliff, or you could rappel right off the end of your rope and you would die. When we get to the very end of our rope, and literally with our physical health or with our relational health, with our spiritual health, there's a real danger, there's a panic that sets in. And in that space, in those places, there's a number of negative patterns that begin to emerge in some people's lives. The way they approach the end of something. Two things that I see most commonly is that we either quit, we just give up, and we get to the spot where we're like, I don't even care anymore. And we retreat relationally. We retreat spiritually. We retreat emotionally. We pull back into our little bubble, into our little shell, because we feel like we're at the end of ourselves and we have nothing left to give. And so I'm like, I quit. I just can't do it. And you give up on your marriage, you give up on your church, or you give up on your job, or you give up on school. And we quit. And it's a negative pattern that sometimes begins to emerge in our life. Every time we reach the end, we give up. But some people, they aren't quitters. They're complainers. Instead of quitting, they complain. And so we either quit or we complain. These are two of the unhealthy responses to reaching the end, where we're looking at our situation and all we can see is the negative. All we can see are the troubles. All we can see are the potential ways that it's going to get even worse. And so we complain and we whine and we moan and we make it worse. Now we're not only at the end of ourselves, but no one else wants to even be around us because of how negative we are. But both of those negative patterns have something in common. They're all about us. We make the struggle, we make the hardship, we make the situation we're facing all about us, about our personal safety, my personal comfort, my personal capacity. God, I don't feel safe. I don't feel comfortable in this. God, I don't think I can do this. I don't have the capacity to move forward. But friends, when we quit or we end up complaining or we slide into another negative pattern in our life, not only do we end up wounding people around us and sometimes exacerbating our situation, but we end up missing out on what God has in store for us if we leaned into that moment. We miss out on what God wants to do in us when we resort to these negative patterns of quitting or complaining, because when we reach the end of ourselves, that's where we find God. When you reach the end of yourself, that's where you find God. Have people share their stories, their faith-transforming stories. Have a friend of yours who is a really deeply rooted, faithful follower of Jesus and ask them, when did you meet God? When did everything change in your relationship with God? And most of their stories will involve somehow, somewhere, them reaching an end. The end of themselves and the beginning of this beautiful relationship with God as He changes us and transforms us over and over again. And what we're going to do over the next few weeks leading up to Easter is we are going to look at what happened when Jesus reached the end. What did Jesus do at the very end, the final 24 hours of His life? What did Jesus do? That last day is so incredible. It literally blows my mind to see what He chose to do and what He chose to focus on in the final 24 hours, because it is so different than what I would have done. Because I'm human and I have negative patterns in my own life. And I look at Jesus and I think, what would it look like? What would it look like if we could embody what He called us to do and who He called us to be? What would it look like if we as the church could learn from His final 24 hours? There's a line in John chapter 13, verse 1 that tells us almost everything we know about Jesus. It's so beautiful that I've read it probably 100 times in the last 3 weeks. This same verse, John 13:1. Just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that His time had come to depart from this world into the Father. Having loved His own who were in the world, He now loved them to the very end. This is so beautiful. Listen to that. Having loved His own who were in the world, He now loved them to the very end. I want to give you some context for His week, the week that He had been. And because, when you sit down with a good buddy or a girlfriend and you've had a tough week, what do? You're like, let me tell you about my week. It's been awful. Well, let me tell you about Jesus' week. On Sunday, He finally entered Jerusalem. People had been clamoring for Him to go to Jerusalem for quite a while. His brothers had actually mocked Him for not going sooner. They're like, if you really are the Messiah, if you really are the King, why don't you go to Jerusalem? Because prove it. Rise up, do what you're supposed to do. Do what we think you should do. Go to Jerusalem. Come riding in as a king. Change our situation. And finally now on Sunday, Jesus comes riding in, not the way they anticipated, not as a conqueror. He didn't do exactly what they wanted, and people were waving palm fronds and saying, Hosanna, blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord. They're waving all these things because they're celebrating that something in them and their situation is about to change, and they have no idea what it is. But Jesus knew. Jesus knew what it meant for him to ride to Jerusalem, that he was riding towards not a beginning for him to sit on an earthly throne, but the beginning for him to go back to sit on his heavenly one. It was the end of his life. So on Sunday, he rides into Jerusalem. On Monday, the next day, he steps into the temple where people were supposed to be worshiping him. People were supposed to be worshiping God, and what did he find? He found that they had taken the entire outer courtyard and turned it into a marketplace where people were profiting off of the desire of people to come and worship God. They were selling things, and they had turned the temple into a marketplace, and he was so upset. So upset, he starts flipping tables, and he clears out the money changers. It was not a good day. It was not a good day to find that his house had been spoiled by people's brokenness. Tuesday, it gets even worse. The religious leaders are looking for any way possible to trip him up. They would love nothing more than for him to do something stupid or say something wrong or make one misstep so that they could have an excuse to arrest him. All day long badgered by these religious leaders as they look for a way to trip him up and arrest him. Imagine how exhausting that would be. Especially when these are supposed to be the people that are leading others into a relationship with God. And now they are literally, verbally, and physically assaulting the Son of God. These are the ones that are supposed to be teaching people about the coming of the Messiah. And now the Messiah is standing right in front of them. And all they can do is ridicule and poke and prod and look for a way to get rid of him. Wednesday we don't know much about. I hope he just hung out with his boys, honestly. I don't know what he did. But now we come to Thursday. It's Thursday, and he has gathered some of his closest disciples together for what will be their very last meal together. None of them have a clue. They don't know that it's their last meal with Jesus. And they gather in this space. We call it the Last Supper. And Jesus begins to love on them. Now, with all that information in your brain, knowing exactly what was going on, understanding that Jesus knew every single thing that was about to happen, as you begin to grasp it, he knew about his impending betrayal, that one of his own people was going to betray him. He knew it. Understanding that he knew about his impending arrest that was going to happen the very next day. He knew that he was going to be arrested and that he was going to be taken to a false trial. He knew about the brutal beatings that he was about to have to endure. He knew about his impending crucifixion, and he knew about his death. He knew about all of that. He's at the very end of his earthly ministry, and we have this passage. How did Jesus respond when he reached the end? It says, just before the Passover feast, Jesus knew that his time had come to depart from this world to the Father. And having loved his own who were in the world, he now loved them to the very end. This is our Jesus. He's the man. This is absolutely incredible. And it sets the stage for everything else we're going to read about in the next few chapters in the Gospel of John. When Jesus reached the end, he made a decision to love to the end. To spread love and hope to the very end. He didn't quit on the task the Father had given him. He didn't retreat emotionally, relationally, or spiritually. In fact, he did the opposite. He engaged deeply with the people around him. He didn't complain. You don't hear him complaining at all. He had a lot to complain about. He didn't complain about how hard it would be. He didn't whine and moan about how unfair it was that he was going to have to take on the sin of the entire world, endure beatings and crucifixion and death for the sake of the people around him. He didn't whine or moan or complain, and he definitely didn't quit. Instead, he just poured out love on the disciples. Poured it out. The passage goes on in verse 2. It says, the evening meal was in progress. And the devil had already put it into the heart of Judas Iscariot, Simon's son, that he should betray Jesus. Because Jesus knew that the Father had handed all things over to him and that he had come from God and was going back to God, he got up from the meal, removed his outer clothes, took a towel, and tied it around himself. He poured water into the wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel he had wrapped around himself. This is so much more than it appears to be on the surface. There's a layer to this, depth to this. There are cultural realities at play here, and there are spiritual truths buried in this imagery. I want you to picture it in your brain. They're hanging out. None of them know it's the Last Supper. In the middle of the dinner, they're still eating. And Jesus stands up and starts taking his clothes off. They're like, what in the world, Jesus? What's happening here? He ties a cloth around himself and he kneels down and he begins washing their dirty, stinky feet. They didn't have showers then. They weren't bathing daily. There were sandals everywhere they went, and the roads were all dirt. It would have been a disgusting job. And they were all men, by the way, which makes it twice as disgusting. Am I right? Right in the middle of dinner, too. You got to go back like, Jesus, we're eating here. What are you doing? And you're going to go back and touch the bread bowl? You better wash your hands first, boy. Right? Right in the middle of dinner, he gets up and he pours water into the wash basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to dry them with the towel he had wrapped around himself. Culturally speaking, this was not Jesus' job. That wasn't something someone like him did. The only person who should have been washing the disciples' feet were the servants they had hired for the event, the people that they were paying to care for them. No teacher, no rabbi, no leader anywhere in that kingdom or any of the known world at that time would have done what Jesus did. None of them would have been caught dead getting on their knees and washing people's feet, especially people that were supposed to be following you. No one would have done this. It was an incredible act of humility, and it was an amazing act of love. What Jesus did is so profound that we can't even get our minds around it culturally because of what it implies. That he was submitting himself to them, humbling himself under them, loving them, and serving them. Think about it in the context of your life. Whose feet would you not think twice about washing? Who are the people in your life whose feet you wouldn't think twice about washing? Some of you are like nobodies. I don't even like washing my own feet. I use a loofah for that junk, right? But whose would you, if someone needed their feet washed, who can you think of like, it's no big deal, I would wash their feet? My children, no problem. They're my kids. They're my flesh and blood. Absolutely. I would wash their feet in a heartbeat. My wife, of course, I would wash my wife's feet. My mom's feet, as she gets older, and if she got to a spot where she couldn't do it, I would wash her feet like this. Done. Why? Why would it be so easy for me to wash their feet? It's so much easier to wash someone's feet when you love that person. When you love that person. What about your least favorite boss at work? What about the kid at school who bullies you? What about the person that robbed you or set you up for failure or betrayed you? Would you wash their feet? These men weren't Jesus' family. They weren't his kids, and none of his parents were there. And yet, Jesus washed their feet because he loved them. That's why he washed their feet. And he defied all the cultural norms of that day by doing so. But it wasn't just a breaking of cultural norms. It was also a profound spiritual metaphor for how far he was willing to take that love. Jesus was about to humble himself in a different way. Not by stripping down to his underclothes and washing their feet. He was about to humble himself even to the point of death on a cross. He was about to pour out something different. Instead of pouring out water to wash their feet, he was about to pour out his blood to wash them clean of every cruel word, every lustful thought, and every sinful action that they had ever committed. Every single thing he did this night was intentional. Everything he did was an opportunity for their hearts to be prepared for what was to come. Everything he did that night was an expression of his incredible love for each one of them and also for you. I want to stop for just a moment and have you think about who was in the room that night. Think about the people who Jesus was speaking to. Think about the people whom he was washing their feet, the ones who he chose to love to the very end. Peter was there. Peter, who would deny even knowing him that very same night, was sitting there. Judas was in the room. Are you kidding me? Judas, who would betray him, who would sell him out, who would be the reason that all of these warriors came to arrest him. Judas was sitting there, and Jesus washed his feet. Thomas was sitting there. Thomas, who later would doubt him and say, I don't even believe that he rose again. Until I see the nail holes in his hands, I won't believe. People that would deny him, betray him, and doubt him were sitting in that room. And Jesus poured out love on all of them equally, without respect to what they would do or what they lacked, without regard to their struggles. Every single person in that room was about to reach an end to themselves. The disciples' way of life, everything they knew, everything they'd given up to follow Jesus was all about to come to an end. And they had some decisions to make. And Jesus knew this. And he knew that they couldn't make those decisions well. They couldn't live into the next steps well until they learned to be loved. 4 decisions that we're going to talk about over the next few weeks here at church that they had to make. The first today is that they had to decide whether to receive his love. Will I receive his love? The second is then this: will I reflect his love? Will I allow the love that he's given to me to then come out of me onto all the people around me? Will I return his love? Not just to be a person who takes, but a person who gives back, to love God in return. And finally, when they were called to do life the rest of their days, would they remain in his love? So they could make it through the long haul. But that night, what we see most clearly in this very first story was Peter's struggle to receive God's love. Peter was like, I can't even handle having you wash my feet. He didn't want anything of that. And we read that in John 13:6. It says, then he came to Simon Peter, meaning Jesus came to Simon Peter's turn. And Peter said to him, Lord, are you going to wash my feet? And Jesus replied, you do not understand what I am doing now, but you will understand after all these things. And Peter said, you will never wash my feet. Never, Jesus. I won't let you. I'm not taking my sandals off. I will leave this room right now if you try to wash my feet. Peter was not having it. There's no way. He did not want Jesus touching his feet because he couldn't possibly comprehend why Jesus would ever even want to. Like, why in the world would you want to wash my feet? And it wasn't just about cleanliness. It wasn't like he had the stinkiest feet, right? It was about duty and a role. He's like, Jesus, that's not your job. If anyone's going to wash feet, it should be me washing yours. You're my rabbi. You're my teacher. I follow you. I serve you. You don't serve me. But it wasn't, I really believe that it wasn't just about his sense of duty and role. I think a lot of it was Peter struggling with his own worthiness. Like, Jesus, I don't deserve that. Like, you serving me this way? Jesus, I don't deserve that. Who am I? Who am I, Jesus, that you would choose to wash my feet? Peter's struggle in that moment to allow Jesus to love him was the same struggle that you and I struggle with today. The struggle to let Jesus love us. We struggle to receive the love of God because we don't understand the love of God. We can't bring ourselves to receive God's love. And because we can't bring ourselves to receive God's love, we aren't transformed by his love. We have to learn to receive, to allow Jesus to pour himself out on us and into us so that he can change us. And until we learn to receive that love, we can never be transformed by that love. We can never extend that love to other people. And Jesus said to Peter, you don't understand. You don't get it. You will one day. One day you're going to wake up, Peter, and it's going to be like a light bulb moment for you. And you're going to be, I see it now. Everything that he did, I see it now. And Peter said to him, you will never wash my feet. And Jesus replied, if I do not wash you, you have no share with me. Whew. If I do not wash you, you can't be a part of anything I'm about to do. And Simon Peter said to him, Lord, wash not only my feet, but also my hands and my head. Right? He's like, wait a second, no, I want to be a part of what you're doing. I didn't mean it. I didn't want to pull back, but I'll jump all the way in. Like he was getting naked in that moment, all right? Ready to get the full bath. And Jesus like, whoa, hold on. No, you don't get it. You're missing the point, Peter. The point is, if you want to be a part of what I'm doing, you have to let me love you. You have to let me do this. You have to let me serve you. You have to let me model for you what it looks like to live a life rooted and established in me. Jesus said to Peter, the very first step to becoming a part of my family, to becoming a part of what it is that I'm calling you to do and who I'm calling you to be, is to receive my love. He says, Peter, you will never understand the depth of that love. Paul prays it later. He says, I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, would begin to grasp with all the saints how high and how wide and how deep is the love of God. Right? They're praying that generations later. Jesus says, you'll never understand the depth of that love, but you don't have to understand my love to receive it. Jesus extended his love to every person in that room, regardless of how broken they were, regardless of what they were about to do. Judas was about to sell him out for a couple pieces of silver, friends. And he'd be so heartbroken over it that history tells us that he committed suicide later. He washed Judas's feet too. He washes Peter's feet. He washed Thomas's feet and every other person in that room. So as we read this text, we have to come to a place where we say, well, what about me, Lord? What about me? Do you really love me that much? What if I had been there? I promise you, no one in this room has ever or will ever do anything that even comes close to what Judas did, and Jesus still loved him. Jesus loves you. And the question that you have to wrestle with is, am I willing to receive that love even though I don't understand it or feel like I deserve it? This is a critical question that we have to answer. We have to wrestle with if we are going to live into any of the teachings that follow. And so many of you have been trying to live out a Christian life without receiving his love in the first place. Or others have been holding Christianity at arm's length, not because you can't receive. There's a barrier between you. You don't understand his love. But everything that comes next is impossible without first receiving his love. Jesus says, I am setting an example for you that I expect you to follow. He was modeling a lifestyle for them that wouldn't be possible outside of the context of his love for us. And friends, I want to remind you, he wasn't giving this teaching during an easy day. He wasn't saying, I expect you to love people on the easy days. Jesus showed us the way of love during the middle of the darkest night of his life. Think about that. This isn't just this is a rainy day teaching, hard day, dark day teaching, an everyday teaching. It didn't come in a season of life that was marked by joy and laughter. For Jesus, it came during a season that was marked by betrayal, denial, deep pain. Jesus wept tears of blood the same night he showed this love. The same night that he taught this lesson. He poured out his own blood on that same day to show the full extent of that love. So when we experience our own dark nights, when we get to the end of our rope, when we experience struggle or heartache or betrayal or temptation and we are tempted to quit, when we're tempted to complain, when we start to withdraw from God's love and are certainly hesitant to pour out that love on anyone else around us, this is the life that we are called to live. This is the person that he's asking us to be. And it's not possible without first receiving his love. Friends, when we follow the way of Jesus, he leads us into a space where we can experience the fullness of God and our joy can be made complete. Later on in John, it tells us that. He said, I told you all these things so that your joy could be complete. It's so beautiful. But we will never experience the fullness of life in Christ until we are willing to receive the love of Christ. This is the gospel. This is the good news. This is what John was describing 10 chapters previously in John 3:16 when he says, for God so loved the world that he gave his one and only Son, that whoever believes in him shall not perish, but instead will have eternal life. John's saying, you have to learn to receive his love. Everything else hinges on that. And the life that he is inviting you into, the life that is marked by love, will change you forever. It'll change your ability to love yourself. It'll change your ability to love other people. It'll change your ability to return love back to God. And it will change your ability to be a recipient of love. And the question is, will you receive it? Will you receive it? I don't know what kind of dark night you personally are facing or have faced or will face in the future. I don't know your situation or your life, but I know this, that no matter what your life looks like, no matter what you've done or will do, no matter what your thought life looks like or what your outer life looks like, Jesus wants to pour his love out on you right now. And the only thing you have to do is decide, will I open my arms and receive it? Or will I stand there looking at Jesus and say, you will never wash my feet? Which one will it be? Would you pray with me? Jesus, there are so many complex things wrapped up in this struggle in our brains. God, we struggle with the way people have loved us in our past, or maybe the way that we haven't received love in our past, God. We struggle with the model our own family showed us. We struggle with our own brokenness and sin. We struggle with our sense of worth and value. And Jesus, you look at us, you look right through all of that. You see it, you know it's there. And despite it all, you say, let me love you. So, Father, today for the people who are in this room who have been trying to live out the Christian life on their own power, God, I pray for them first. The ones who are here who have given their life to you but are struggling to receive your love on a daily basis and are trying to live out the modeled Christian life, but they're struggling to do it because they're doing it on their own, God. Today, my prayer for them, my prayer for you, if that's you, is that you would simply open your hands right now and say, Jesus, I choose to receive your love again today. I choose to receive your love from me today. Fill me all the way with everything you have and everything you are. And for those who are in this room, Jesus, who have never had an opportunity to be loved by you, Jesus, I pray right now that you would unlock their heart, that you would unlock their soul, and that you would pour yourself out. If that's you, you just simply open your hands and say, Jesus, I receive your love. I choose you. Jesus, I receive your love, that love that washes away every broken part of me, all my sin, all my struggle. I receive your love. And I ask God that today you would begin the process of transforming me in that love. I pray these things in the name and in the power and through the love of Jesus Christ.